So, our practice tonight is to read together some of Dōgen Zenji's Eihi Dogen's Genjōkōan. We read the first paragraph last week, which was a good start. And we should all feel like we have the opportunity to practice this at the beginning. Again, every time you encounter Dōgen and every time we read Dōgen, he's one of the many writers in the tradition who evoke and provoke a feeling of not knowing. And that's one of the helpful and very useful approaches to Dōgen, is that the more you read, the more you realize, oh, I'm not really sure. And an important quality in the mind opens, that quality of doubt, the spiritual doubt we're talking about, not a kind of skeptical doubt, but that quality, that pillar of doubt, that really strong foundation of our practice is something that studying Dōgen will help us awaken and develop. The more we read him and study him, the more we question what we know, even just about the words of Dōgen. Now, I was thinking and I realized that for some of us here, for whom English is not your first language, you're having to do two translations. And perhaps your English is, most of your English is quite excellent. And so you don't have to really translate much. But I'm sure there is, having to turn it in your mind into Hebrew or whatever your language may be. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. For Dōgen, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're, the meaning is being another step removed. It might be another step closer. Because the translations from his very idiosyncratic Japanese, and anyone who studied it in Japanese in the original has commented that the Japanese Dōgen writes in is obscure and difficult. So it's another layer of, another obstacle to accessing the meaning. And it creates that greater sense of not knowing, is because it's Japanese. I've heard it said from native Japanese speakers that they don't understand Dōgen's Japanese. So in a sense, the fact that it's in translation is not necessarily a bad thing. It's not necessarily removing the meaning from us. The meaning's already removed because Dōgen's level of awakening is much deeper than ours. So he's writing from that place, and we need to move in that direction in order to understand the teachings more. So it's not necessarily an intellectual challenge. This is what I'm trying to say. It's a spiritual challenge. It's not so intellectually obscure, it's more spiritually obscure. What is the awakening that we're trying to access here? What are we trying to realize in our hearts? What is Dōgen trying to open up in my understanding, in my insight? Yeah. And that's more than just what the literal words are saying. So I think when we read Dōgen, and this is just my introduction for tonight, is to consider it as a form of practice. That it's a form of practice to read Dōgen and to study Dōgen, because it's not about grasping it intellectually, because that's just turning it into a form of knowledge. Whereas Dogen's intention as a great teacher was to help us awaken and to become more free from our own problems, and obstacles in our hearts and minds. And that's the intention of him as a teacher. So that's how we should read it. He's trying to help me awaken and to become more liberated. How does this work? So with that in mind, that's the intention. That's the intention that we approach these teachings. So before we look at the text, does anyone have a question or comment about Dogen and what we're doing here? All good? Okay. So I have the text here. I'm not sure if everyone has a text, but I think what I'll do in this case with us, does everyone have it, or should I put it on the screen? Put it on the screen? Is that a yes?
People, you can wave or something.
Noble silence. Do you want me to put it on the screen?
I would be happy if you put it on the screen.
That was a yes?
Yes.
Okay.
I will put it.
All right. Are you going to do it? Because I've got it right here. Okay. Great. Okay, so this is all we need. Hopefully we'll see if we can get past the second paragraph of Genjōkōan, although it does arouse and allude to and refer to a lot of teachings. But I want to look at the first two sentences and simply ask you, how do you understand it? Because these two are quite, quite important. These two sentences, they really do express something very strong. And I'm wondering, I've thought about these throughout the years that I've read them, and I'm wondering what your impression is. So we're at the second paragraph here. To carry yourself forward and experience myriad things is delusion. That myriad things come forth and experience themselves is awakening. I want you to consider that for a moment. Carry yourself forward and experience myriad things, all the multiple various things is delusion. That myriad things come forth and experience themselves is awakening. What do I do with that? I feel it's speaking to our meditation experience to a certain way, and to our life in approach in general. What do you think?
I feel like I have an idea of what is writing about, but I also feel like it's dangerous. So the way I understand it is that, well, the first sentence, within the first sentence, there's division between oneself and the many things outside of oneself. Whereas in the second sentence, there is a less dual understanding of what experience is.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's no right or wrong understanding here, because we're trying to sort of enter it. We're trying to approach it, and we approach it from ourselves. But this is also like, how do we even approach text? And how do we approach life and our experience? Now, what's our point in going through the day? What's our point in going through the day? And this sense of carrying yourself forward. Where's the ego in this? Now, my sense of self, what is ego? It's self-importance. It's not that you have a self, because self is a tool, right? I mean, self is a tool, like having green eyes or glasses or being male or female. Those are tools, okay? But when we identify with them really strongly, and then other things are for the sake of fortifying or strengthening that tool, so that instead of the tool being to serve others and to do a job, then others and other people and things are for the sake of like making that tool stronger. So kind of the relationship has been reversed. The Bodhisattva, remember, Dōgen is within the Mahayana tradition, and the ideal is the Bodhisattva. And that's what we need to remember, is that when we're looking at the teachings here, the ideal is the Bodhisattva ideal. And the Bodhisattva ideal is that we're serving others in order to liberate them from suffering. Like that's the purpose, okay? And that's why we see our lives as a tool for doing that, for fulfilling that role. And that's the Bodhisattva role, right? And so your sense of ego then is like just part of that service. And that's kind of like what a bodhisattva is not afraid of the ego, but not using things like wanting to own things or wanting to have status or money or wealth or power or sensual desire, all the hindrances, all these attachments that we have. And the 5 hindrances, there's the 8 worldly concerns. What are the 8 worldly concerns? There's like attachment to like sensual desire and aversion to pain. There's attachment to worldly possessions, to gain, and there's aversion to loss. There's attachment to praise, there's aversion to criticism. There's attachment to good reputation, and there's aversion to like shame and embarrassment. So those are what's called in the Dharma the 8 worldly concerns. Now those 8 worldly concerns kind of are what motivate us to protect our sense of self, because we want to avoid the pain of those losses, and we want to strengthen our sense of self. And that's because we have a fundamental delusion. So the source of suffering of the self is ignorance in the Buddha Dharma. That's like the main cause there is ignorance or delusion, right? And delusion is that ourselves are really separate from other things, and the relationship is inverted. It's like the wrong direction. So the relationship is that, the world serves me in order for me to be stronger, not me as a bodhisattva serving the world. So Dōgen, in a way, is expressing these 2 alternatives in terms of a relationship that we have as a self to the world. Remember, The self is not the problem. It's the deluded self that's the problem. When we talk about being selfless, it doesn't mean we don't have a self. It means that that self is serving others and it's not using them for the sake of myself. It doesn't mean you have no self. I mean, ultimately, yeah, an emptiness, but we're talking about how to behave in the world. And so when Dogen's talking about experience, he's talking about the relative level of how we interact with things and the world. And this is really the crux of what it means to practice. It's like the key is to have a healthy relationship to yourself and to the world. An unhealthy relationship is when the self becomes exaggerated in importance. And that exaggeration happens because we have a fundamental ignorance as to what the self really is. We think the self is permanent and like separate, right? And that's the fundamental delusion. So here we're being offered two options, right? The first one is that deluded self, which he says, to carry yourself forward and experience things, myriad things, is delusion. It's kind of, the idea that like I will move through the world and my experience is for the sake of becoming a better self even if I'm using experience to become like, more kind, I'm still using the world to make me better. And that's fundamentally deluded because it's still seeing the world as an object for myself, right? Even if I've kind of given it a fancy turn and said, oh, but I want to be a good and enlightened self, it's still using the world, the experience to, move forward. Like I want to advance and I'm using my experience to advance me like a job. The more job experience I have, the more I move forward. So if I use my spiritual life as a sort of a job resume, that's carrying myself forward and, experiencing things. I want to gain lots of experience, lots of retreats, lots of enlightenment experience. And then I'm, moving forward, even spiritually. And that's delusion because it's fundamentally an inverted relationship. It's still seeing experience for my sake. That's alternative number one. And alternative number two is not delusion. It's understanding, okay, that no matter what, your experience is not going to make yourself like better or more enlightened. Because the fundamental truth of the Buddha Dharma is that all beings have Buddha nature. We have Hakuin's Song of Zazen, where he said, all beings are Buddha, just like, all ice is water. So even though some forms of water look solid and they don't seem like they have the nature of water, that's just because they're ice, and we're not seeing the truth that it's actually water. So with a lot of sentient beings like ourselves, we don't see through the outer form to see the nature of it, which is that it's Buddha. So that's a delusion, is that we think that we're not Buddha, so we need experience to become Buddha. Then the alternative number two is that myriad things, that all of experience of the world, come forth and experience themselves as awakening. This is, try to see this through the filter of our meditation approach. And meditation approach is what is called tathata, okay? And tathaka is thusness, suchness in Sanskrit. And it's kind of the idea here is to observe your experience in a more raw, unfiltered form. To appreciate the thusness and suchness, the now of this moment. Before it's been filtered through my own karma, meaning my own desires. Karma is volition. Karma is will. Okay? And so, through my own will, like what do I want from my experience? That's carrying myself forward. That's delusion. when I filter experience through my wants. Is it good for me? Is it bad for me? You know, these loud sounds are bad for me. That's seeing, experiencing things through my experience, through me. But seeing sounds as this loud or quiet, and letting them be loud or quiet as they are. You know, letting pain be pain and pleasure be pleasure. Before I you know, sort of filter it through my own sense of self, my likes and dislikes. Yeah? So the great way is not difficult, just avoid picking and choosing. That's what the third ancestor said. And this is Dōgen's second sentence, which is, you know, experience happens and experiences itself on its own terms. That's awakening, not on your terms. So that's a very subtle awareness. That's a very subtle form of meditation, to be able to sit, to observe your mind judging, to observe your experience, and to come closer to it without all of this sort of judgment of what's good for me and what's not good for me. And that's, you know, things on their own. Merely things come forth and experience themselves. That doesn't mean you're not there. It just means you're not, you know, categorizing everything according to your likes and dislikes, which is judgment that we do through most of the day. And sometimes it's good judgment, like, you know, nice, you know, thank you very much, or nice person, or good day, or, you know, nice weather. I mean, all these things. But whether the weather is nice or bad has nothing to do with the weather. That's not the weather experiencing itself. That's me, right? Now that's how I go through most of the day. What if we press pause on that? What would it be like? What would it be like? Just press pause on the constant judging of our experience. You know, what would it be like? Well, Dōgen says that that's awakening. I mean, that's awakening. When it's not through this delusion, the delusion of like, hey, what's good for me?
Daniel, can I ask something? When he says experience, what level of translation does he mean? Because we all experience things, right? So is it in the level of understanding experiences, understanding, or experience things that happen to us? This is one question that I have. And the other, the second sentence, when he says myriad things come forth and experience themselves, it sounds to me like there's a division between the things that experience themselves and me or whoever. You know, it's almost like the experience has essence, which is not, you know, not connected to me. And understanding this makes it, you know, the awakening.
Yeah. Well, that could, I mean, that could create some problems, because in the same way that we don't want to see ourselves as sort of separate and special, things are not also separate and special too, right? So I think to simplify it, I want to think of it in terms of shikantaza, of zazen. And the way zazen is translated, shikantaza, or Soto Zen Zazen, is just sitting, just sitting. So that just sitting means just sitting for the sake of sitting, not for anything else, not to gain anything from it, not to even understand anything from it. There's just sitting. And just sitting then becomes also just sipping water, not thinking whether I like it or don't like it. I'm still thirsty, I need more water, or, you know, all the thoughts that accompany it. Can I just drink the water? Just, you know, washing dishes, just chopping an onion, just walking my dog, just doing these things. Is it possible to just do something without it, you know, involving a lot of conversation that's not part of that? And this is the experience of it, experiencing itself, that I'm not adding. My constant desire to find meaning in my experience is adding to it. If I strip it away, what does it mean? That if it's just, it is what it is. It is what it is. So it's not that it's experience. There's no experience. I can't presume to know, to think that, you know, the water, the dog, the birds, the wind have, experience on their own side. Because all of this is a study of the self. All of this is a study of the self. And it's a study about what a healthy or unhealthy, what a deluded or awakened self is. How does an awakened self view her experience? It's not about the things. So all of this, that's something we should keep in the background, understanding that all of this Dharma is for the sake of understanding our own relationship to ourselves in a healthier, more awakened way. So it's really not about like the things, it's about my relationship to the things. So these things come forth and experience themselves is Dogen's kind of way of saying, what's it like to just sit? What's it like to just walk if you're walking meditation? Or are you daydreaming and thinking about your walking? What's it like to just talk on the phone and just have a conversation? So we don't want to make it into something mystical like the beads from the bead side, but more shikantaza, just sitting, just talking, just reading, just listening, just lying down in bed, just, shopping, just driving, just all this stuff. It's like, I'm always thinking of Daido Roshi's comment to somebody who was driving in the car, driving him somewhere. And he turned on the music on the radio, and Daido said to him, yeah, how you listen to music while you're driving? Like, how can you do that? If I'm listening to music, I can't do anything else. And I would think if you're driving, he didn't drive, but if you're driving, how can you dare do anything else? Well, isn't there enough to focus on? There's too much. Yeah. So this is the just doing what you're doing, and that's things experiencing themselves. Meaning, there's so much life happening. There's so much going on when it's coming forth into you through your senses, through your eyes, through your ears, through your mouth, through your tongue, through your mind, all of your 6 senses. There's so much happening. That's enough. That's enough. So they are experiencing themselves through you, right? And that's the that's the myriad things experiencing themselves. Where are they experiencing themselves? This is, again, I'm emphasizing this teaching, is that they are experiencing themselves in you. The myriad things are experiencing themselves in your mind and in your experience, right? If you let things be, just let it be. It is what it is. I accept it as it is. I don't need to add to it. I don't need to subtract from it. That's myriad things experiencing themselves. Where? In me. So we have to be clear of that relationship, is that we're really what Dōgen is talking about this whole time. And if you skip one, there are 2 paragraphs, we see the most famous paragraph of this, which is to study the Buddha way is to study the self. And that's where he just kind of makes it really clear that what we're doing here is we're investigating, we're doing a deep investigation of the nature of the self. I don't know if that helps though. Anything else we want to say? And if anyone thinks anything different, that would be helpful.
I just remembered something Daido said in one of his videos. He came to his teacher, and he used to smoke a lot, Daido. So the teacher invited him, and Daido said, so we can discuss things, right? So he said, no, just smoke. No, just smoke. So, yeah.
Yeah. And if sometimes you're doing something and you were just to do it, it wouldn't be as pleasurable anymore. Yeah. I think there's something I remember reading about him, that Nezumi Roshi made him smoke cigarette after cigarette after cigarette after cigarette, smoking 2 packs in a row until he felt totally sick and wanted to throw up. So he could experience just smoking. Yeah. Again, we don't want to necessarily, and I'm going back to what I said in the beginning of this is not a intellectual exercise. This is an inquiry. We're investigating. And to investigate, we want to observe. We want to observe our minds. We want to observe the paper. We want to observe the words. Okay. I'm sharing some things I think about, but you guys can have other observations or simply just not listen to anything I say. That's also helpful. Those were right here. Those who, you can see this good. And it's interesting using this approach because usually when we're sitting in the room way back another time, if we read something, then I'd have the text and different experience. You couldn't see it, so maybe I was making it up. Those who have great realization of delusion are Buddhas. Those who are greatly deluded about realization are sentient beings. Further, there are those who continue realizing beyond realization, who are in delusion throughout delusion. When Buddhas are truly Buddhas, they do not necessarily notice that they are Buddhas. However, they are actualized Buddhas who go on actualizing Buddhas. Okay, this is curiouser and curiouser. That's what Alice would say. And those who have great realization of delusion are Buddhas. Okay, we understand there's like different levels of knowing. Those who are greatly deluded about realization are sentient beings. So Yasutani Roshi said that there's 3 types of not knowing, or great silence or not knowing. He said there's that you simply don't know something. That's one level. There's not knowing that you don't know, and there's knowing that you don't know. So those are 3 levels of not knowing. There's simply I don't know, meaning so I don't understand, or I don't know what time it is, or I don't know what you're talking about. There's a intellectual thing I don't understand, I don't know. That's one level. Okay. Then there's I know that I don't know. Now that knowing that you don't know is the not knowing, is the Zen not knowing, is the unknowing, right? And that's a place that takes some development and humility to be able to say, this is the great doubt, that I really don't know who and what I am. I really don't know what practice is really about. Because if I do, then I'm probably, assuming something. And I'm holding on to an idea that may get in my way. So there's that, I'm at a place, and there's a certain spiritual maturity in being able to say, I really know now that I don't know. I really know that I don't know. I don't know what mountains and rivers are, okay? I don't know what the Buddha Dharma is about, and I don't know what awakening is. Then there is the not knowing that you don't know. And that not knowing that I don't know is when we feel like we have knowledge. And we, especially if it's spiritual knowledge, you know, we go on the path and people become very fervent and very convinced by their way. And they say, this is the truth. This is the true way. And that's the not knowing that you don't know. It's not the same as thinking that you know. Okay, it's not knowing that you don't know. That's different. We can know facts and such. Okay, we can have knowledge. But here we're talking about the spiritual knowledge, about the nature of the self and the nature of Buddha and the nature of awakening and the nature of the path. So this is where what we're talking about here is, you know, who and what I am and who and what you are. So what we have here is when he says, those who have great realization of delusion are Buddhas. Okay, meaning, like I understand, you know, there's a realization that means I know I don't know. You know, I know I don't know. Because what is delusion? Delusion is really thinking you know. That's delusion. It's thinking, I know who I am, I know who you are. I know what the world's about, okay? That's delusion. Delusion is strong belief in yourself. Right? And whether that self is your nation, your religion, your truth with a capital T, that's delusion, is that it's permanent and, you know, unchanging and real. Instead of, you know, this is temporary. It doesn't mean nothing works and nothing is real. It just means that I don't understand that it's really temporary, okay? And it's only a skillful means for benefiting others. But if my truth is more important than people, that's a real delusion. That's real delusion. And so when truth, or what I believe and what I know, becomes, you know, that people have to serve it rather than the truth serving people, that again is another form of, you know, carrying yourself forward and experiencing myriad things as delusion. If I carry the truth forward, in my knowledge forward, and I use that in order to relate to others, like either, you know, Buddhism is the greatest thing, or Judaism, or, you know, my country, or my way, or my political group, or my knowledge, you know, that's not understanding delusion. So if you are aware of delusion, you really see that like all these ideas are problematic if I hold them as a flag that separates us. That's delusion. And if I see through that, then I have great realization about that delusion. I really see through this religion of ideas. I really see through that. And that's awakening. That's Buddha, is to awaken, is to be awakened from this sleep, this dream of all myself. Those who are greatly deluded about realization are sentient beings. Okay. So when I don't know that I don't know, when I don't know that I don't know, which is another way of saying that I'm really sure of myself. I'm really sure of myself. Okay. So that means I'm greatly deluded about realization. I know what the truth is. I know the right way. I know who I am. I know who you are. And I know what you need. That's delusion about realization. You know, who am I to say? Who am I to say? Maybe so, said Suzuki Roshi, but not necessarily so. So this is in one of the terms that Suzuki Roshi uses is renunciation. Renunciation is saying like, you know what, take this belief. It's so precious, here, I give it to you. You know, I don't need it. I don't need it. Further, and then I want to share koan with you, and we'll see whether we can get beyond that. Further, there are those who continue realizing beyond realization, who are in delusion throughout delusion. When Buddhas are truly Buddhas, they do not necessarily notice they are Buddhas. However, they are actualized Buddhas who go on actualizing Buddha. Okay? This is reminiscent of the koan that I wanted to share. And I think if we want to kind of penetrate these verses, the koan of ordinary mind is the koan that that comes up when I think of this. And I wanted to share this with you because I think it may help. So I just want to get to my, 1 second. So I'm going to share with you ordinary mind is the way. It's case 19. And believe me, if you want to interrupt or ask a question, please do. So this is case 19 of the Mumakan, the gateless gate. And this is an old favorite of mine, and I've brought it up to the, throughout the years. I've engaged with this with you guys, with some of you. And this is Joshu and Nansen. Joshu was one of the greats in the golden age of Zen, from 700 to 900 was that time. And Nansen was his teacher. And Nansen has a lot of koans, and so does Joshu in these collections. And the koan is the exchange between the student and teacher here. The main thing I want to get to, though, is the commentary by Muman, because it'll help us with Dōgen's verses. And the koan is such. Joshu asked Nansen, "What is the way? What is the way?" And Nansen answers, "Ordinary mind is the way." Should I search for it? Should I seek it? Asked Joshu. Nansen says, if you try to find it, you'll become separated from it. Okay? If you're looking for yourself, you won't find yourself. Meaning you'll find an idea of yourself. So then Joshu says, well, how can I find the way if I don't look for it? That's a common sense. Nansen says, the way is not a matter of knowing or not knowing. And so here we can we see how these teachings are built on each other. And what Dōgen is expressing is not something new, but rather it's a continuation of the constant commentaries of these classic koans. And, Dōgen in his way is commenting on this as well. The way is not a matter of knowing or not knowing. Okay? And this is the delusion and realization. Knowing is delusion. Not knowing is confusion. Remember when Yasutani Roshi, he said there's knowing, there's not knowing. If I just don't know, I'm confused. What do I do? If I know, I'm deluded because I'm believing in a false idea, a false God. How can I get to that place of, I know that I don't know? When you have really reached the true way beyond doubt, small doubt, skeptical doubt, you will find it as vast and boundless as outer space, as Nansen continuing. How can it be talked about on the level of right or wrong? Right? So here we see, when things experience themselves, that's awakening. When the myriad things come forth and experience themselves, that's awakening. That's, we understand now a little from a different angle, that it's getting beyond right and wrong. We can experience things, not just from what my judgments are, this is right or wrong, for the world, for me, for my friends, It's vast and boundless. How can it be talked about on the level of right or wrong? With these words, Joshu came to a sudden realization. Okay, it gives us some angle to enter Dōgen, or Dōgen gives some angle to enter the koan. They're helping each other. And Muman's verse, Master Muman from the year 1100 gave his commentary on this when he made this collection. And his commentary was, Nansen dissolved and melted away at Joshu's question and could not give a good explanation. All right. So yeah, he didn't give us any greater clarity. He kind of told us what we already know, that this is impossible. Even though, and here's the key, even though Joshu came to a full realization, he must go into it for another 30 years before he could truly understand it. Now this is, as we see, this is picked up by Dōgen in certain ways. When Dōgen says, there are those who continue realizing beyond realization. This is Joshu continuing for another 30 years. You know, he had realization, and then he continues. He continues. He's never done. He's alive. If he's still alive, there's more practice to do. When Buddhas are truly Buddhas, they do not necessarily notice they are Buddhas. This is the not knowing. This is the not knowing. Okay? It's not about knowing or not knowing. If you fully have a realization, there's pretty much nothing to talk about. And definitely, it's not about being a Buddha. However, they are actualized Buddhas who go on actualizing Buddha. Keep on working at it. Keep on working at it. You know, Joshu had the greatest teacher of his time. He had a sudden realization during this exchange. And yet, to deepen his understanding and true presence, he would have to go into the koan for another 30 years. So says Master Muman. This is, you know, realization beyond realization. You keep realizing it. So you go back to some of the same sentences, some of the same ideas, some of the same sittings, some of the same glass, you know, sips of tea, and some of the same people you meet. And then years later, you have a deeper realization. You keep practicing. You're never done deepening your relationship to this situation and opening your awareness to make it more vast, open, and less about right and wrong. And you realize that there's something greater than right and wrong, and it's kindness and compassion. And that's the Mahayana way, is that the true greatness is the bodhisattva. And the bodhisattva does not judge about right or wrong. And that's, you know, where Joshu had to go. He had to keep going. He's like, yeah, I understand. But my heart's not there. So your mind, our minds are very quick to grasp the meanings. But our hearts and our feelings, our compassion, and the way we relate deeply to others takes many more years to catch up to what our minds understand. And to change that way of relating to others and to self, and to the relationship between self and others in a harmonious, non-judgmental, and compassionate way takes decades to soften. So this is the realizing beyond realization, and yet we need that fundamental faith that there are Buddhas practicing even when they don't realize they're Buddhas. They do not necessarily notice that they are Buddhas when Buddhas are truly Buddhas. Now, a self-conscious Buddha would be a problem. I mean, it's kind of a contradiction in terms. But Buddhas who do not necessarily notice that they are Buddhas are truly Buddhas. Now because what your priority is to simply serve. And that's to allow all things to come forth and let them be themselves, let them experience themselves. You should experience yourself, you should be yourself. You know, the wind should be the wind, the dog should be the dog, my friend should be my friend, my child should be my child, my parent should be my parent, and not who and what I think they should be. And that's the myriad things experiencing themselves, is where I let go of right and wrong. And that may take years to allow. Because our knee-jerk reaction is, you know I know the right way, and I know the wrong way, and I know when you're right or when you're wrong. So we want to soften that a little bit, and that takes longer than just the, you know, mental realization. Joshu had a very clear mental realization there, and that's what they said. Wow, sudden realization, like awakening, like, oh my God, I understand. Like, I deeply understand this. And we've had that. It can be a very deep, deep kensho. That's a sudden awakening. Like, I get it. I see through the delusion. Great. You know, what would Master Mumen say to that? That's a good start. Yeah, let's talk in 30 years. I mean, if you're Joshu. So I think we need to think in terms of our practice really long term, and at the same time have the faith that a Buddha is you know, acting Buddha, realizing Buddha, even not noticing that he or she is Buddha. And then we go on. And and if we want to, Dōgen brings it to the meditative awareness, and he makes it a little more concrete in the next paragraph, which is, I'd like to just get through the next paragraph and finish with that before next week, where we talk about his well-known one. When you see forms or hear sounds fully engaging body-mind, you grasp things directly. Unlike things in their reflections in the mirror, and unlike the moon and its reflection in the water, when one side is illuminated, the other side is dark. Okay, so this is the meditative awareness, and this is letting myriad things come forth and experience themselves. Is not having things, you know, is not putting myself first and saying, come on, life, let me experience you, you know. Here we're saying it is seeing things directly, the meditative mindful awareness of being really present and not picking and choosing and judging according to my likes and dislikes, but acknowledging that the likes and dislikes are there. It's not a mechanical thing. I'm not being robotic. I'm including it all. My feelings, my thoughts, the senses, my sensations, and noticing things as they are. And I'm engaging fully in body and mind, meaning that I'm wanting to be aware. This is a little different, how Zen meditation is a little different than some of the more focused, like Theravada, where you're focusing very much on single senses or on sense of touch and or on just a breath. But in Zazen, the Soto Zen Zazen is really open awareness that engages fully body and mind. So you want your awareness to include touch, sound, smell, taste if you're tasting, sight if you're seeing, and if just sight is just meditative, you're just relaxing the gaze. You know, if a fly flies by, or if a car drives by, or if someone walks by, you don't say it didn't happen. You acknowledge it, you see it, you engage fully. And body and mind engagement means I'm just fully aware and accepting of this happening all in my experience now. And moment by moment, I'm going to stay really aware of this. So I'm going to be fully engaged. I'm going to really, really stay focused on what my experience is in this moment. And yet it's not a tense thing. Because it's all body and mind, you can relax and let the awareness be more broad and not so narrow. So that's a kind of a subtle thing when shikantaza is taught initially. It tends to sometimes make people a little confused. What do I mean just have an open mind? Yeah, because initially meditation is taught as being very focused on the two fingers underneath the hara of your navel. Notice rising, falling, rising, falling. And then when you have a certain level of concentration, okay, the point falls away. So that the kind of general open awareness is more the approach. And this is the fully engaging in body and mind. That anything experience you include everything into that engagement of the moment without grasping. And the reason it is just this moment is because the next moment there's other things to notice. The moment has passed and has been replaced by something else. So I'm not mourning the passing because there's something else right now to be aware of. No? There's this. There's this. So when you see forms or hear sounds fully engaging body and mind, you grasp things directly. Okay? Grasping doesn't mean I'm holding on to them for my sense of self. It means, wow, I see it as it is. As it is. Tataga. I see it as it is. You know, the suchness. This is it. This is it. Right? And when I start describing it, I start like moving away from it. You know, I can say warm air, but then I've already kind of judged it. So I want to keep it a little closer to the raw experience. And I can do that by staying really close to this moment. And when I start, you know, extrapolating and kind of commenting on it, then I return to the breath. But then when I feel like my concentration is more together and secure, I can let the point soften and open. So I can include more of the sense of this whole sphere that I call body and mind, you know, which is my experience, my life experience. And as he says in the last sentence, this is different from, unlike things in their reflections in the mirror, which is already a kind of separation. Okay. One side is illuminated, the other side is dark. So that's the second sentence. It's just saying, it's kind of, that's the more dualistic approach that we're sort of dividing things. So we need to have that sort of single-pointed, open awareness in order to fully engage with our experience, to let the myriad things be as they are and to emerge. The bird is the bird. It's not whether it's pleasant for me or unpleasant. The traffic is the traffic. It's not whether it's pleasant or unpleasant. Yeah? Things are as they are. And then I start judging. So as we see, this all comes down to a certain practice that we call meditation or zazen. And that's why zazen is really, really, really central in terms of our practice. Really central. You know, to allow ourselves to grasp things as they are in this moment.
Can I ask something?
Yep.
So it has to do with something you said earlier about, you know, talking about Dōgen's writings about not knowing, or actually about the koan, about things being beyond knowing or not knowing, beyond right or wrong, and how that's an expression of a deep love and compassion, and and a deep aspiration to help others and to benefit them. And that just kind of brought up this thought about how in Zen, despite it being a Mahayana, within the Mahayana tradition, like compassion, I feel, is somehow expressed in a very subtle way. Like it's almost masked by these more central ways of speaking, of, you know, like what we've been reading and hearing like today.
Mm.
And somehow it is still there between the lines, and it's present. But I don't know, it's just this thought that it's interesting to me how, in comparison, let's say, to Tibetan Buddhism, where it's so at the front of it, it's so present in a very visible way. So I'm just like curious about that style of expressing it so differently, despite it being still such a central aspect of the teaching and of the practice.
Yeah, it's true. Like there's a certain atmosphere and style, and Zen is focused primarily on emptiness and realizing emptiness of self through meditation. And the assumption that is made is that if you can get over yourself, then you'll naturally be more open and caring of others, because you'll see how you're related to them. That's the assumption, so that the focus then is on emptiness, assuming that the result will be more compassion, right? Now, that's a big assumption, and it can be, it can lead to misunderstanding. I've definitely seen it. And many Zen communities are kind of cold. The formal practice is strong. The emphasis on discipline is strong. Okay, the observance of the rules is strong. The flexibility and consideration is sometimes less strong. Now that is where humans take it. Where humans, not Buddhas, where humans take it. And then it's for humans to correct that. And so that's why whenever I read emptiness, I read compassion. When I read about emptiness and about meditation and about non-self, and you know, that's immediately, that's where I go. I understand it as a way of expressing compassion. Now, one of the reasons I'm drawn to that is because I know that if you emphasize compassion without working on the self, then it's going to be selfish compassion. It's going to be like, you know, using compassion as a sort of an outer mask in order to serve yourself and become like a better sense of self. So that's, you know, so in Zen, emptiness is the mask and compassion is the person wearing it. And often in some ways where compassion is emphasized, compassion is the mask, but you know, there can be a self behind it wanting to wear it. So both are needed, the wisdom of emptiness and the compassion of service and bodhisattva. You know, wisdom and compassion are these two wings of enlightenment. And without both of them, I mean, they can't fly. So the Zen has culturally emphasized teachings on wisdom and emptiness, has not articulated compassion as much, and some of the shortcomings are obvious. Okay, it created a very strict culture, and it created a culture, especially a Japanese culture and Chinese, that easily led to things like militaristic rules, and supported that. So that was, how it became distorted because the balance was not found, right? So yeah, I think it's definitely. I mean, Norman Fisher, one of my favorite teachers, the Zen teacher, he runs the Everyday Zen organization in San Francisco, and he definitely addresses that frequently, that Zen needs to speak more about compassion, that it's just not there enough. It's not there enough. Loving kindness and compassion. Yeah. So yeah, I think it's not something I want to say, oh, yeah, they deal with it. They just deal with it by not dealing with it. No.
Daniel, can I say something? I feel that it's a different approach. The Theravada liturgy, thank you, Gal. The Theravada liturgy tells you what to do and how to do it. You have to be compassionate. You have to absorb this and that. And I feel that in the Zen tradition, you have to find out for yourself. And this is coming up, this is what he said. It says, to study the Zen is to study the self. And eventually, if you study yourself long enough and deep enough, you'll come to that. Because it's part of your nature to be compassionate. So it's more difficult, more elusive, but it's there. You have to find, and if you find it by yourself, for yourself, then you know it. That's how
I agree also. I also agree with that. Just that the time is short, so sometimes we need to, we need to get these qualities. Like,
well, they say not to waste the time, right? They say don't waste time.
Yeah. I recommend learning from all the traditions, and ones that you're drawn to through your own personality, your own kind of background and karma. You can do more learning and practice with. But that, as people who, have all of them available, I think all of them emphasize have different emphases and of the teachings. And together they make a sort of a healthy whole. And I think, I know for myself, like my learning of Tibetan Buddhism has helped me understand Zen more. Yeah. But yeah, I think it's all correct. Would anyone else like to share anything before we sit for a minute and finish for tonight? We got through 2 paragraphs. That's progress. So it was good to sit with everyone. Let us finish with 1 minute to return to some quiet and some breathing. Now let's dedicate this evening to the welfare of all beings. May all beings be happy and peaceful. May all beings be free of suffering. And may we practice for that end. So thank you everybody for coming together and sharing this evening with us.
Thank you.
It was really nice to see you and sit together.
Thank you.
I hope you have a good week.
You too. Bye.
Thank you.